trying, but we got a brick wall in front of us. If they would have said, Billy, do what you need to do, and we'll support you. That's what the United States is supposed to do. We would have had a Barry Island pump by now, because I'd have put every marsh bucket, every barge with a bucket on it. We'd have built the Barry Island. Trees would be gone by now. I guarantee you. We'd have protected it, and we'd have had 89% of the oil outside, not in the marsh. It's going to cost 50 times what we estimated it would have spent. But what the hell is an emergency permit if they got to tear it? We'd spend 2 weeks putting it together. Something stinks. They were told to hold that permit out there for some reason. Colonel Lee worked too hard to help us. He was excited for the first 2 weeks. When he walked into that airport on Monday evening, there was a different man. He didn't even look me in the eye. Well, we got a lot of things to look at. Well, what? A lot of procedures. Well, what are those procedures? Well, a lot of them. That is bullshit. That is a cop-out excuse. And we paying for that. We paying for it with their salaries, and we paying for it with the marshes and the wildlife in this state. And for that, it's criminal. They ought to go to jail.
They didn't set that.
Anybody that stays in the way of doing everything physically possible, we should be throwing a kitchen sink at this place. What do you mean we don't go out in the afternoon to deploy boom? My guys were out there with flashlights last night. You know what? There's nobody in charge that has any passion for doing the right thing. It's a job to them. The guy at BP met me going through it. I'm going home for the weekend. I'm like, Greg, I didn't even know it was the weekend. Glad you could go home for a weekend. Absolutely ridiculous. Give me the money.
Obvious question, what will the impact of the BP oil spill be on agriculture and aquaculture?
The impact on aquaculture could be tremendous. It could be tremendous. It could be devastating. We are working hard to try to keep as much of the oil out of our estuaries. When you look at the aquaculture, and we're talking about the offshore aquaculture first, that is a $3 billion. That's $3,000 million a year. You're talking about the oyster industry, the crab industry, the shrimp industry, the fishing industry, and everything to the pogie boats that collect the menhaden and the pogies and other things that go into feed and fertilizer. It is huge. Then when you come onshore, our onshore estuaries, there where you're talking about, potentially, all the different types of seafood that breed in those areas. Also, when you look at the waterfowl, you look at the duck industry, you look at the hunting, look at all those things, the sportsman's industry as well. And then what we've got to make sure it doesn't come inland enough to affect our inland crawfish, our inland catfish, or inland into agriculture if it gets into our rice fields or into our cattle pastures. It depends, because this has come into the estuaries as far as 10 or 11 miles, but there's a massive amount of oil still out there. And what happens with that massive amount of oil, and we're concerned if we would get a hurricane that would blow that, 10 or 12 miles onshore. We're working hard to make sure it doesn't happen. We have a number of contingency plans to deal with that. But right now, this challenge has never been seen in America before. This is the largest oil disaster that we have ever faced. You're talking about something that we know now is 3 to 10 times the size of the Exxon Valdez.
And growing.
And growing, and because it is still, as we speak, right, it has not been finally killed. When we talk about killed, stopping the flow of oil, and it's a massive amount. But we have pushed the limits, our limits as far as human technology. We're drilling in water a mile deep. There are other wells that are deeper, but not many. And this was a regrettable accident. We must not lose sight, too, the fact that 11 people lost their lives and other people were injured. But we are working together through the Governor's Office of Homeland Security, Emergency Preparedness, the Unified Command Group. I'm also working with the Department of Health and Hospitals and with the Department of Economic Development and also the Department of Environmental Quality and the Department of Labor and others. We're part of a team that will be moving forward. Our part of that, we will be working in the area of seafood inspection and other things as seafood certification. So we are working now. We have plans of how we're going to move in the future and how we can basically deal with the issues and then bring our industries back.
On the one hand, there's some reason for optimism because many have pointed out only a small percentage of the state's aquaculture has so far been affected. But the flip side of that is this enormous plume of oil, actually now at least 2 plumes, will be with us for months, maybe years to come. So you don't know about the long-term effects, but are you concerned that so far Louisiana seafood is getting a bum rap?
Well, we have dealt with that too, and we have doing numerous public relations efforts, and other states doing that. So the seafood that is there is safe. We're also testing our seafood. We took samples right when this started, before any oil got away from the immediate site, and to look at get baseline levels on all of our seafood for testing for all sorts of things. And we're going to make sure, and that's what we're talking about, the testing and certification program, the seafood you buy is safe, that it's wholesome, and it's free of contaminants. And we're working on that. We are concerned because there's this large volume of oil. And it is very, very large. It's not within man's ability to move that oil that is below the depths. You're talking about something that it may be 1,000 feet thick or more, 10 miles by 100 miles, and it also be 50 to 100 miles offshore. Now, some of the thought processes are over time, if it sinks to the bottom and it moves further offshore, there's a huge trench. It could fall into that trench and be sequestered. There's a lot that we yet do not know. We have the best scientific minds in America and in the world working on that. But I can tell you, whatever the issue, whatever the problem, we are going to face it head on. We're going to be honest about what we find and how we're going to deal with this. But just like hurricanes,
time tonight, we're hearing the story of the explosion of the Deepwater Horizon from someone who survived it. But Michael Williams' version of the story doesn't just show how terrifying that night was, but it may give investigators essential insights into how it happened.
I heard this awful hissing noise, this whoosh, and at the height of the hiss, a huge explosion.
Michael Williams was one of 115 crew members who survived the Deepwater Horizon blowout. Williams described to 60 Minutes how he made his way to the deck of the rig in the chaos of an unfolding catastrophe.
I remember thinking to myself, you know, this is it. I'm going to die right here.
Williams says other crew members left in lifeboats without him. So wearing a life jacket with a burning rig to his back, he jumped off the platform.
I fell for what seemed like forever. A lot of things go through your mind.
Once he surfaced in the toxic water, one of the lifeboats pulled him to safety. Looking back, Williams says he saw several things that investigators like UC Berkeley professor Dr. Bob B. will dig into. Williams says 4 weeks prior to the explosion, operator error likely damaged a key part of the blowout preventer, a rubber gasket at the top of it called an annular. It regulates the pressure of natural gas inside the well, keeping it from blowing out. After the operator error, Williams says a supervisor noticed chunks of rubber coming out in the drilling fluid.
I recall asking the supervisor if this was out of the ordinary. He said, oh, it's no big deal. And I thought, how can it be not a big deal? There's chunks of our seal that's now missing.
Plus, Dr. B says later pressure readings when BP was trying to cap the well may have been inaccurate because of problems with that annular.
You may get pressure test recordings, but because you're leaking pressure, they're not reliable.
Williams also says one of the blowout preventer's control pods wasn't working right. He says BP didn't fix it. And when the company chose to use a faster method of capping the well to stabilize the pressure inside of it, it exploded.
I remember closing my eyes and saying a prayer and asking God to tell my wife, little girl, that Daddy did everything he could. And if I survive this, it's for a reason.
Gives me the creeps. He's the president of Hollywood. He's supposed to give you the creeps.